Hey there, beautiful souls. Don't forget to smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to dive deeper into our latest stories. Get ready for a tale that's intimate, provocative, and oh so captivating, a journey of rediscovery that'll leave you breathless. My name's Evelyn, and at 62, I thought I had life all mapped out. Mornings spent tending my garden, my fingers brushing soft petals. Afternoons lost in the pages of a novel, and evenings wrapped in the warmth of my husband, Mark. As we reminisced about our decades together, life was supposed to be predictable, a gentle rhythm of comfort and routine. But one sultry evening, a single conversation set my world ablaze, awakening desires I'd long buried, leaving me craving something more. It all started at a corporate gala hosted by Mark's company, where he'd devoted over 30 years, his ambition as steady as his heartbeat. The event unfolded in a lavish Chicago hotel, chandeliers dripping with golden light, casting shadows that danced across the room. The air buzzed with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the low, seductive hum of a jazz band, its notes curling around me like a lover's whisper. I've never been one for these affairs. I'd rather be home, curled up with a book. But Mark's insistence was hard to resist. So, I slipped into a navy blue dress, the silk clinging to my curves, accentuating the lines of a body I'd almost forgotten still held allure. The fabric felt like a second skin, stirring a quiet thrill as I stepped into the night. At first, everything was as expected. Mark lost in work talk, his colleagues' voices blending into a familiar drone, while I chatted with the other spouses, my smile polite but distant. Then, Richard Caldwell approached. "Evelyn, may I steal you for a moment?" His voice was deep, velvet smooth, cutting through the room's hum like a caress. Mark's boss, mid-60s, tall and distinguished, carried an air of quiet authority that made my skin prickle. His eyes, dark and piercing, held a promise of secrets. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. What could he want with me? But curiosity, laced with something warmer, pulled me toward him. I nodded, following as he led me through a side corridor, the gala's noise fading into a distant murmur. The corridor was dimly lit, shadows playing across the walls, and he guided me to a private lounge, a haven of soft lighting, a crackling fireplace, and leather armchairs that begged to be touched. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and as I sat across from him, my heart raced, a flush creeping up my neck. I crossed my legs, the silk of my dress sliding against my skin, and his gaze flickered, noticing. "I hope I'm not pulling you away from anything important," he said. His smile small but charged, his eyes lingering just a moment too long. "Not at all," I replied, my voice softer, almost breathless, as a spark of anticipation ignited within me. "What's on your mind, Richard?" He leaned forward, his hands clasped, the faintest tremble betraying his calm. "It's about Mark." My breath caught, a mix of worry and something else, something forbidden stirring in my chest. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the armrest, the leather cool against my skin. He hesitated, his gaze locking onto mine, intense, almost intimate. "Not exactly, Evelyn, but there's something you need to know." The weight of his words pressed against me, his voice wrapping around me like a warm embrace. "I've known Mark a long time," he said, his tone low, deliberate. I've watched him build his career, support his team, provide for his family. But through it all, I've seen something else. My throat tightened, my body leaning toward him, drawn by the heat in his words. "What is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He shifted closer, the space between us shrinking, the air electric. "He doesn't see you, Evelyn. Not the way you deserve." The words landed like a touch, sending a shiver down my spine. My breath hitched, a rush of defensiveness mingling with a deeper, more dangerous feeling, a longing I hadn't dared name. "I don't understand." I stammered, but my body betrayed me. A flush spreading across my chest, my lips parting slightly. Richard's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "Mark's a good man, but when was the last time he truly looked at you, not as his wife, but as the breathtaking woman you are?" His gaze traced the curve of my jaw, the line of my neck, and I felt it like a caress, my skin tingling under his attention. "I've watched you, Evelyn, at these events, standing in the shadows while he's lost in his world. You pour so much into him, but does he ever fill you back?" A lump formed in my throat, but beneath it, a heat bloomed, spreading through me like wildfire. I wanted to argue, to defend the life I'd built, but his words struck too close, stirring a hunger I'd suppressed for years. "I don't mean to overstep," he said, leaning back, but his eyes never left mine, holding me captive. "Sometimes, an outsider sees what those closest cannot. You deserve to be seen, Evelyn, truly seen." The words sank into me, igniting a spark deep within, a desire to be noticed, to be wanted. I sat there, frozen, my body alive with a warmth I hadn't felt in decades. Richard's gaze softened, but the intensity remained, a silent invitation lingering in the air. "Promise me you'll think about it," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a thrill through me. I nodded, my hands trembling as I smoothed my dress, the silk teasing my skin. "All right," I whispered, my voice thick with unspoken need. As I stood, his presence was a quiet heat beside me, and as I passed him, the brush of his arm against mine sent a jolt through my body, my breath catching. The Gala was still alive when I returned, the music and laughter a stark contrast to the fire now burning within me. Mark stood among his colleagues, his face alight with passion, his hands animated. I'd always loved that fire in him, but now, Richard's words echoed, "You deserve to be seen." When Mark glanced at me, his nod was brief, distracted, and a pang of longing twisted in my chest. Something had shifted, a seed planted that I knew would grow, no matter how I tried to bury it. The drive home was silent, the city lights blurring past as Mark gripped the wheel, his face etched with the familiar lines of stress. I stole glances at him, memorizing the sharp curve of his jaw, the way his lips pressed together in focus. But when had he last looked at me with desire, with that spark that once set us ablaze? "Did you have a good time tonight?" he asked, his voice flat, a ritual question. "It was interesting," I replied, my tone careful, my thoughts elsewhere, tangled in Richard's words, his gaze, the heat of his presence. At home, Mark followed his routine, jacket hung, keys on the counter, retreating to his office for emails. I stood in the kitchen, the emptiness of the space mirroring the ache in my chest. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. Mark was steady, reliable, the anchor of our life together. But Richard had awakened something a craving, a need to feel alive, to be touched not just by hands, but by eyes that truly saw me. In our bedroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. 62. Silver streaks in my auburn hair, faint lines tracing a life well lived. But my eyes, they burned with a fire I'd forgotten, a loneliness I hadn't named. I ran my fingers along my collarbone, imagining a gaze that lingered, a touch that sparked. Was this part of aging, this fading into routine, or was it something more? Something I could reclaim? The next morning, Mark left for work with a peck on my cheek. "I'll be home late," he said. "Big client meeting. Be safe," I replied, but my mind was elsewhere, restless, alive with possibility. Before I could stop myself, I dialed Richard's number. "Evelyn." He answered, his voice warm, surprised, sending a shiver through me. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" I asked, my heart pounding. A pause, then softly, "Of course." An hour later, I sat across from him at a quiet cafe by the lake, the air rich with the scent of coffee and autumn leaves dancing outside. Richard's presence was a quiet storm, his eyes tracing me with a curiosity that made my skin flush. "I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you," he said, his voice low, intimate. I stirred my coffee, the swirl of cream hypnotic. "I wasn't sure I'd call," I admitted, my gaze meeting his, a spark igniting. "I've been thinking about what you said," I continued, my voice trembling with vulnerability. "You were right." His eyes darkened, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. "I'm not saying I regret my life," I said, my fingers brushing the rim of my cup, the warmth grounding me. "Mark and I have something real, something strong, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to want for myself." He leaned forward, the space between us charged, his voice a low murmur. "And now, Evelyn, what do you want now?" My breath caught, my body alive with the question. "I don't know," I whispered. But the truth was, I was beginning to feel it, a hunger, a need to be more than the wife in the background, to be seen, desired, alive. A silence settled, thick with possibility, the distant hum of the cafe fading. "I just want you to be happy, Evelyn," he said, his words wrapping around me, warm and heavy. I looked at him, really looked, his features sharp yet soft, his eyes holding a promise I wasn't ready to name. He'd seen me, truly seen me, in a way I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice to stay in the comfort of routine or to chase the fire that was beginning to burn within. Days passed, but the heat of that conversation lingered, curling through my thoughts like smoke. At home, Mark moved through our routines, oblivious to the storm brewing in me. I watched him, his familiar gestures, the way his shoulders tensed after a long day. And I wondered, could he see me again? Could we rediscover the spark that once bound us? One evening, I decided to try. I slipped into a dress I hadn't worn in years, deep burgundy, the fabric clinging to my body, reminding me of the woman I still was. When Mark came home, I was waiting, a glass of wine in hand, the kitchen soft with candlelight. He paused, his eyes flickering over me, a hint of surprise breaking through his usual distraction. "Evelyn, you look beautiful," he said, his voice catching. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "Sit with me, Mark. Let's talk." He hesitated, then joined me, his gaze lingering on the neckline of my dress, a spark of something old and familiar in his eyes. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years about us, about the distance that had grown, about the woman I'd buried beneath routine. "I don't want to be invisible anymore," I said, my voice steady, my heart racing. "I want to feel alive." He reached for my hand, his touch warm, tentative. "I didn't know you felt this way," he admitted, his thumb brushing my skin, sending a shiver through me. "I want to see you, Evelyn. I want to try." His words were a spark, reigniting a flame I thought had long faded. That night, we didn't just talk. His hands found me, rediscovering curves he'd forgotten, his lips tracing paths that felt both familiar and thrillingly new. For the first time in years, I felt seen, desired, alive. But Richard's words still lingered, a whisper of temptation. Days later, I saw him again, this time at another company event. He stood across the room, his presence magnetic, his eyes finding mine through the crowd. My breath caught, my body responding to the memory of his voice, his gaze. He approached, his smile slow, knowing, enjoying the evening. "Evelyn," he asked, his tone laced with something deeper, something that made my pulse race. "I am," I replied, my voice low, a hint of a challenge in my eyes. "And you?" His gaze lingered, tracing the line of my dress, the curve of my shoulder. "More than I expected," he murmured, stepping closer, the heat of him stirring something reckless in me. "You look radiant tonight." I felt the flush creep up my neck, my body alive under his attention. "Thank you," I said, my lips curving into a smile that felt dangerous. Bold. We talked, the conversation light but charged, each word a dance, each glance a spark. I knew I was treading a fine line, but the thrill of it, the possibility, set my skin alight. Mark noticed. Later, as we danced, his hand firm on my waist, he pulled me close, his breath warm against my ear. "You're different tonight," he said, his voice low, possessive. "I like it." I smiled, my body pressing against his, the heat of the moment blurring the lines between past and present, between safety and desire. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of rediscovery. Mark and I began to rebuild, to see each other anew. Our evenings were no longer routine, but filled with touches, glances, moments that reignited the fire we'd let fade. Yet, Richard remained a shadow in my thoughts, his words a constant reminder of the woman I could be. I saw him again at a quiet lunch, his presence as intoxicating as ever. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a low caress. "You're glowing. Have you found what you're looking for?" I met his gaze, my heart pounding. "I'm starting to," I said, my voice steady but laced with a truth I wasn't ready to fully admit. I'm learning to want again. His smile was slow, approving, and for a moment, I wondered what it would be like to step across that line, to let myself fall into the unknown. But I didn't. Not yet. Mark and I were rebuilding, rediscovering, and I owed it to us to see where it could lead. Yet, the pull of possibility, the thrill of being seen by another, lingered like a forbidden promise. I was no longer the woman in the background, content with routine. I was Evelyn, alive with desire, standing at a crossroads between the life I'd known and the one I could choose. Every night, as Mark's hands found mine, as his lips traced the lines of my body, I felt the woman I'd buried come alive. And yet, Richard's voice echoed, a whisper of what else might await. I didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in decades, I was ready to find out, to live, to want, to be seen. So, what do you think? Dear listeners, have you ever felt invisible, only to discover a spark that changed everything? Share your stories below, and let's keep this conversation alive. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and never stop seeking what sets your soul on fire.